All right, bad morning to y'all. It is this edition of Bad Morning News. We're on episode fucking 7 now. We might
Yep.
actually have something really successful going here. And um just a heads up to y'all, this might be also streamed on some of the platforms that host Moment of Rage right now, because I'm going to talk to them about that. They like live shows too. I'm not exactly sure how that setup would work, but we can cross that bridge when we come to it. I've just wanted to let people know that I was considering talking to them. So we might be on many platforms, I guess is the primary thing. Additionally, next Monday we might be splitting this stream to Facebook, fucking, all these other platforms that are possible. I'm thinking also D Live, until we get a Bad Morning News thing for like the official account. It'll probably be my account that gets the rewards, but I plan to split whatever rewards I get with Lupinit and whoever else becomes a host, given the amount of time that they put into it. So that being said, if you would like to support the show, you can support it by using Brave, which is the ad resistant, tracker resistant browsing experience. And if you want to support the show, you can also download the Cash app, which is a Federal Reserve note and Bitcoin wallet that comes with a Visa card. Additionally, you can get a Liberty mug, mugs to consume fluids and promote liberty at the same time, piss your coworkers off, whatever your primary motivation is. These things got it. So, without further ado, let's jump into this. I believe you have a story from Scotland for us this morning, Lupinit.
Yes, I do. Now, those of you who watch Sargon may have seen mention of this a few days ago, very briefly, but it piqued my interest. And I came across it when searching for sort of recent news involving crime. Lap dancing and stripping are acts of violence, the Scottish government says. Strip club owners fear the new licensing guidelines will herald a purge of adult entertainment venues across Scotland because government advice states that lap dancing should be seen as an act of violence against women. Laws underpinning the new licensing regime have been passed by Holyrood, but the system has not yet come into force. The framework will allow councils to set a number for strip clubs classified as sexual entertainment venues in their area, which could be 0. The limit applies to even if there are existing venues, meaning owners could face closure or a lengthy and expensive legal fight to challenge effective bans. This is on the Times, so it's unfortunately behind a data wall. So I'm not particularly comfortable with the Times at the moment right now. But if you have a subscription or you wish to register your data, you can read a lot more on this particular one. But yeah, apparently the motion, as I understand it, was basically pushed for by activist groups, which shall remain nameless, just for my own personal security. And they've managed to convince Holyrood through enough activism and support that lap dancing, a voluntary activity where one side is not allowed to touch the other, is violence against women, the ones who aren't allowed to be touched. So making a voluntary decision on your point is now considered an act of violence if clothing is removed. Just, I really think Scotland has now gone full potato.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be very hard. The potato grows really well in that region, but either way,
that's Ireland.
I believe, don't they grow well in Scotland too? Though I know Ireland's where they had that like potato famine, but
Ireland's the joke basically for potatoes. If you're talking of the various isles, let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, I was making a joke, but not that joke, because I'm relatively sure potatoes grow pretty well generally on that,
possibly,
like like latitudinal line.
To be fair, I'm not aware one way or the other. It's very possible.
Yeah. Well, because like and also I've been consuming a lot of potatoes recently and trying to think of different ways to do that. Because if you consume potatoes, it's better for a keto diet. So,
Yeah,
than many
it's a
others.
good source of starch.
Because I can have like one potato and a carton of eggs, and it gives me the protein and starch I need for a meal. So
Yeah, I mean that's the key thing for me is potatoes. My main source of starch myself, if I'm honest, but that's for my own gut reasons.
yeah. So I mean, does this mean that people are accused of rape actively? Do you know that?
No, I don't think it would be that they'd be accused of rape. It would just be a crime to allow it to occur.
Oh,
If
so
that zone decides to say that there is no room whatsoever for any lap dances.
right. Okay.
It's basically down to council discretion at this point.
Well, that's incredibly dumb, especially since the women aren't being forced to do it. But
No, they're paid to do it.
I mean, but that's violent, you know.
Voluntarily.
You can't just hand somebody, debt notes. That's like you might as well be hitting them.
It's like somebody screaming, "Shut up and take my money!" is apparently now committing an act of violence. That's the thing that gets me.
Well, I mean, telling a woman to shut up is awful and misogynist anyway. You know, it doesn't matter the context. It doesn't matter if the bitch is just rambling on and on. You tell her to shut up.
You can't. You've already fallen into a misogynist trap, mate.
Oh, that was the joke.
I know.
Okay. Anyway, in slightly more serious news, because I can't take Scotland seriously anymore. Fucking, and I'm sure fucking Dankula's on board with that. Like everything new that comes out of that is just fucking incrementally more absurd. So, and in some ways exponentially so as well.
I'm waiting for it to get geometric, then it'll actually probably change.
Yeah. It's so fucking obvious that the people over there are a microcosm for the rest of the world, rejecting the things which could make them freer because it's not as convenient or as easy. I mean, fucking, it's so much easier to just get a regulation passed by an arbitrary government that doesn't actually listen to the people than it is to actually do shit for yourself. And in the long run, people don't care about their long-term impact on the world. They don't give a fuck. They just want their fucking shit done, and they don't care if they're pushing it through based on like little jokes that were made, like a Nazi pug, or in this case, not jokes, but some woman being paid to move her ass in a specific way. No, we gotta put the government in the way of that. That can't just go on. That's awful. Fucking people, man. And speaking of government, this guy got a big dose of government in his skull cavity.
Oh dear.
Cops go to wrong home, execute innocent man with bullet to the back of his head, no indictment. A grand jury irresponsibly failed to indict cops who went to the wrong home and executed an innocent husband as he came to the door. This is South Haven. I'm gonna probably mess this up because I didn't remember my fucking state names, but I think this is Mississippi. Missouri. It's one of them. It's MS. It's in South Haven. 1 year ago, police responding to a call of domestic violence went to the wrong home and killed an innocent husband. Now, the Free Thought Project has just learned that the officers involved in the killing will not be charged. The officers were brought to a grand jury by District Attorney John Champion, who attempted to get them indicted on charges of homicide. However, the grand jury irresponsibly failed to return an indictment. The grand jury was given all of the evidence and they decided not to indict. From my perspective, the case is closed at this point. Everything that's a quote. Everything about this is wrong. I'm outraged. Shame on the police department. Shame on the DA, Mr. Champion. Shame on you. You need to retire. Pastor Rolando Rostro Lopez, family advocate, said. In July of 2017, Ismael Lopez and his wife were the only ones home when Ismael heard the dogs barking, so he took a look outside to see what was going on. Seconds later, he would be shot and killed by people who claimed to protect society. Police had no right to be there and had gone to the wrong address. The South Haven Police Department admitted officers went to the wrong house on that fateful night. According to police, they were trying to serve a warrant for domestic assault to Samuel Perriman, who lives 36 feet away from Lopez's home. Police claim that when Lopez came to the door, he pointed a gun at them. However, multiple bullets were fired through the closed door, and Champion admitted that the autopsy showed Lopez died from a gunshot wound to the back of the head. According to WMC5, 3 officers were at the scene, but only one of them opened fire. That officer fired 6 total shots, 2 at a dog that ran out of Lopez's house toward the officers, and 4 into the house. The bullets went through Lopez's front door. 1 hit him in the back of the head, and Lopez's dog was grazed by a bullet. There's more to this article, but that's the essential gist. So over in the States, fucking guys getting literally freedom in the back of their heads because, you know, everything the cops do is for our freedom. So
yes, this is by design, people. If you give all the power to decide how laws are enforced to one local authority, that local authority decides how to use it. And if you don't really get a say in how they use it, and you don't, then this is what's going to happen. No-knock raids where some bloke gets shot through a door and nobody faces any punishment.
Yeah.
But that's by design.
And of course, like that kid with the Wiimote in his hand that the cop accused of being a gun and shot this kid. Killed this kid. And she was very sad about it. She was crying tears, but the kid died. Fucking unbelievable. If you haven't been looking at this stuff for a while, then it's just like another thing that happened.
Yeah, it's just another strange event. Nothing to see here. Move along.
Yeah. Anyway,
unfortunately, it's not.
Anyway, speaking of bullets, you had something about Lavoy Finicum that should make us all think that, like, this is relatively normal.
Yeah, give me a moment while I pull that one up from yesterday. So yeah, those of you who are unaware, this should probably hopefully get you caught up. So this is from NPR. So I'm picking a fairly liberal option this time. Open up Brave. It's just being difficult now. It will not load. So I'm having trouble loading the link. Technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Well, while you get that link to load, I'll open this thing. Top Democrat candidate openly supports taxing families with more than 2 kids for irresponsible breeding. Breeding, not breathing. I think it sounded more like breathing when I said it just now, but I mean, kind of that'd be funny if like they even tax the air. Fucking so. Just to preface this, I am biased here. I don't know if I need to say that, because I do support the idea of responsible fucking, and I think that it's relatively necessary to regularly point that out. Because, like, I think responsible fucking is a mandatory plank to a better future here. Because otherwise, effectively, there's a bunch of people who come out of that situation that are the product of abuse and neglect, and will then be parented by the state instead of by actual parents. And so I do like responsible fucking, and I support the idea of responsible fucking to the level where many people have accused me of being a eugenicist. So just with that being said, I'm also an anarchist, and I don't support laws forcing responsible fucking, especially since, those laws don't respect the people who do it anyway, and they'll only pretty much just make back alley abortions and visits to Planned Parenthood more common, if anything they do. So keep all of that in mind, because I do like where this guy's coming from, probably, but I don't like what he's doing. He says the thing says a top Democrat candidate, this is also from Free Thought Project, from Pennsylvania, has given millions to groups advocating for taxing families to the hilt for irresponsible breeding. This is from shithitsthefanplan.com. Actually, this is apparently a cross post. A Democrat congressional candidate in Pennsylvania has desires to tax parents who have more than 2 children as irresponsible breeders. Scott Wallace is a population control zealot who has donated over $7 million to population control groups. Wallace is also supported and endorsed by both Planned Parenthood and NOW, National Organization for Women, for those of you who don't know. According to the Daily Wire, Wallace, a millionaire and Democrat who believes in taxing families with more than 2 kids for being privileged, also believes that the tax would be on the privilege of irresponsible breeding. Between 1997 and 2003, Wallace gave $420,000 to Zero Population Growth, ZPG, now Population Connection, an organization co-founded by Population Bomb author Paul Ehrlich. Fox News reported. From before its inception, ZPG had announced its intentions to tax large families for the, quote, privilege of irresponsible breeding. A 1968 brochure advocated abortion to stabilize population growth and claimed that, quote, no responsible family should have more than 2 children. Therefore, irresponsible people who have more than 2 children should be taxed to the hilt for the privilege of irresponsible breeding.
Hang on. Just from a logic perspective, what, everybody makes the same amount of money? Everybody can support the same amount of people? Everybody has the same amount of land? Is that what the argument is for that logic? Because that ain't gonna fly for me.
Well, I mean, it might be, but like, to be completely straight, a lot of the people who do have large amounts of kids don't have a whole large amount of income, and many more of them are in it for government benefits to begin with. So they get benefits for those kids, so those benefits would probably have to increase, and the taxes would not likely have much impact on that. Plus the idea of taxing people who have, a responsible amount of children, that flies in the face of everything we know about population, because the people who breed the most are the lowest IQ, at least as of now. That's, there's a great documentary on it. It's called Idiocracy. And I think people he just got, I think there are a lot of people who could do keeping their legs shut, and I would really appreciate it if they did, but to legally mandate it in this sort of way won't actually prevent population growth. It'll just mean that the people who give a fuck about the law will not fuck as much, maybe. I mean, it's
and those exactly, that don't won't.
Well, and it's exactly like a codification of the kind of thing that you see in Idiocracy. It's just saying, instead of like individuals being responsible for whatever children do come out, we're going to say that, all of these upper class families who care about the environment fucking or care about long-term impact and aren't just like fucking around because they can, aren't just spreading their seeds because it's, after the high school class and they've got those free condoms now that break very easily. Fucking the people who care about this will be the people who would have had less children anyway. So it's
True.
not exactly like this is going to stop the population growth. It'll just continue it with the trend of people who do it irresponsibly to begin with and aren't going to be stopped by a new tax. Essentially, also, it seems like an income tax, which means that if you don't have an income, it doesn't apply. That means that all
Yeah.
you have to do is be on government benefits and you can
And then you can breed irresponsibly.
fucking rabbit yourself into a 20-person family and not be taxed for it. As far
Yep.
as I'm seeing, I might be wrong about the way this is decided, but
Mate, I wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly how it's been phrased. FYI, I finally got that link to work.
gotcha. All right, cool. Because I basically pulled that story up for filler and to talk about responsible fucking because it is a thing that I do support. You know, I want people to do it. I just don't want people to do it because of a government force program, especially when you can't actively control immigration. And there are plenty of people coming into this country anyway who weren't born here to begin with. So it's not exactly like it's going to do anything for population growth. But whatever.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I am for, just to wrap that up, I am for people being self-responsible.
Yes.
So that kind of encapsulates responsible fucking, responsible spending, responsible everything.
Right.
Being taking acceptance that when you make a choice, that was your choice, not somebody else's, and any fallout that comes of it is your problem, not anybody else's.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I do advocate responsible fucking as a primary plank of moving forward. You know,
Sure.
because if people produce a bunch of kids that they couldn't take care of, who's going to take care of those kids but the state? And if the state's taking care of them, who's going to prevent them from growing up thinking that the state's the only one who can do X, Y, and Z, that these people are benevolent, even though all these things in history prove they aren't? You know, who's going to show them the actual way forward if the state is the one guiding them on their path? And this is sort of like, you know, doubled. Like it's really, really like disheartening to see people like just pop out a child that they can't take care of on purpose so they can just set that kid down in front of the TV, especially since a lot of these people were neglectful to begin with, didn't find a life partner that they were comfortable like raising kids with, wasn't comfortable doing that, so they like fucking just set them in front of the TV the whole day, collect child support and fucking spend it all on purses and shit. I mean, we're talking about a class of people, a society of people that have grown up in an environment that encourages them to be very, very like irrationally selfish, to put it really mildly. And a lot of these people like would do well to responsibly fuck, and they would provide a generation of children who was treated better, so they would treat other people better. You know, but that doesn't mean that we should force it. And it doesn't mean that the force mechanism will actually be something that helps in the end. So, I mean, like, it's all sorts of fucked, because I agree that responsible fucking is a primary plank, but I don't think that it's going to change things dramatically to have a law on the books. And I do think
never
that it's
does.
just a revenue generation machine, because the state's just going to tax people and people are going to keep doing it, sort of like speeding or you know, jaywalking, all of these things that will continue happening really regularly because people are horny and want to fuck, and the state's, you know, Illuminati machine has been pumping out imagery for a long time that makes them very, very primed for that fucking. So I mean,
well, to put it just to limit up, you know, they're just trying to make us all Vogans anyway. So,
oh yeah, yeah. And if we were Vogans, we would understand that that the bureaucracy definitely has to go on as it always has. Yeah.
Right. So, Lavoy Finicum from NPR, July 24th. FBI by Merritt Kennedy. FBI agent heads to trial accused of lying about deadly Mueller shooting. An FBI agent is facing trial on charges linked to a deadly incident in January 2016 during the armed occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon. Jury selection begins Tuesday at a federal court in Portland. W. Joseph Astarita was a member of the FBI hostage rescue team, which is described by the Bureau as the federal law enforcement's lead counterterrorism tactical team. According to federal prosecutors, he was trying to capture the leaders of the 41-day occupation organized by members of the Bundy family. Tensions reached a head on January 26, 2016, when law enforcement attempted to stop and arrest several militants driving into cars between the refuge and Oregon's Grant County. I'm going to hit this up for narrative crafting in a minute, but that was a good one. The occupants of one of the cars were arrested. Robert Lavoy Finicum, who had been acting as the group's spokesman, was driving a second car and sped down the street as FBI agents and local police gave chase, according to the indictment. He tried to avoid a law enforcement roadblock and drove off the road, hitting a snowbank. Shortly afterward, he was fatally shot by Oregon State law enforcement. So, just again, quick aside, that was a yada, 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 and he died. Just to let you know, because it was a lot. There's video evidence of what actually happened from within the car, because everybody basically took out their phones and started recording, not realizing that they were going to bear witness to somebody creating a snuff film, not on purpose. You back down or you kill me now. Go ahead, put the bullet through me, Finicum said in a video recording of the incident taken by another militant, which I think was his wife, as NPR has reported. After failing to follow multiple commands to put up his hands, Robert Lavoy Finicum was shot by Oregon State Police personnel whilst attempting to reach for a firearm inside his jacket, the indictment reads. Prosecutors said Astartia fired 2 rounds during the attempt to arrest Finicum, but failed to disclose that to law enforcement. Astartia, who has pled not guilty, is facing 2 counts of making false statements and 1 count of obstruction of justice. Just to let you know, he faced 2 other counts, which were dismissed by the judge, and I don't even know what they were. The defense argues the government's case lacks eyewitnesses, ballistic evidence, and videos showing Astartia firing, Oregon Public Broadcasting's Conrad Wilson reports. The case is seen as a win-win for the Bundy family and a lose-lose for the federal government, according to Wilson. Whether Astartia is convicted or acquitted, the Bundy family and their supporters will be able to use the outcome to amplify both Finicum's message and his place as a martyr for their movement. In many ways, Astartia's trial is a no-win situation for the U.S. Department of Justice. If the agent is convicted, critics of the government can point to Astartia as a sign of corruption. If he's acquitted, conspiracy theories of government cover-up will surely follow. An investigation by local officials into the death of Finicum deemed the fatal shooting by the Oregon State police officer as justified, as NPR has reported, even as it suggested possible misconduct by the FBI team. Earlier this month, the federal judge threw out 2 of the original 5 counts against Astartia, 1 each of making a false statement and obstruction of justice. 2 of the remaining counts are tied to statements Astartia allegedly made to FBI supervisory special agents that he had not fired his weapon, which the indictment states were material to the FBI's decision at the time not to launch an investigation into agent-involved shooting. Finally, he is charged with obstruction of justice because he allegedly failed to disclose to the Oregon State Police that he had fired his weapon. As NPR Colin Dwyer has reported, multiple attempts to prosecute Bundy brothers Ammon and Ryan have failed. In 2016, they were acquitted for their role in the Malheur occupation. While their fellow occupiers were later convicted on federal conspiracy charges, the brothers Bundy had successfully argued that they were simply exercising their First and Second Amendment rights during that 41-day standoff. In January, a judge dismissed a federal case against the brother and father, Cliven Bundy, over a separate armed standoff in 2014 tied to cattle grazing rights in Nevada. At the center of both disputes is the Bundy's opposition to federal government's control of public lands. Now, I'm going to quickly give an overview on this because I followed the Bundy and the Hammond family incidents quite heavily when they were going on, simply because I was quite interested to see if eminent domain would beat public force against the state.
Well, also because you grew, if I remember correctly, you grew up here. Like you grew up in America and then you moved to Britain. So
exactly.
I mean,
I grew up back there. I lived in one of the original states, one of the Virginia. So we have
a still have family who lives there too.
Oh yeah, I still have family back home.
So you care about the way that it works.
Exactly. So I wanted to know that, is this going to become a thing? Is everybody's land just going to get nicked out from under them? Because that's what was happening. Basically, all the land was being stolen to apparently protect some turtle in the area that they had their farms in Nevada, and they hadn't been seen there in years. So obviously, we need to protect that land in case they magically come back or get reintroduced by the state. But sod the landowners not getting actual value for their land. We'll just take it from them. That was basically the rule. And obviously, people in that region got a bit pissed, got their mates together, and defended their property. And it created a huge standoff between everyday citizens and loads of government officers. And there's loads of footage of them kettling people and doing all sorts of tactics to try and instigate a response. And one of the terms that keeps popping up in this specific article is the term militant. Now, strictly speaking, when you're using an argument for reporting news, you shouldn't necessarily use the strongest possible term unless you want to display your bias. By using the term militant, which is pretty much the strongest possible term that you could use to describe these protesters, the government is able to manufacture the idea in people's heads these are one step away from being proper full-on Al-Qaeda. And that's retarded. They never fired on officers, whereas officers fired on them. It's
and they made fucking actual jokes about that too. Like fucking I forget who it was, damn it. But one of them, and I still have Twitter followers who use this as a label because it's too good not to. Some Democrat senator, I believe it was, called them Y'all-Qaeda.
But yeah, it's that kind of concept, saying that these people, for protecting their homes from the state, are terrorists. That's not that's not how terrorism works. If you're protecting your land, the people who are the terrorists are the ones attacking you, not you, because you're defending your land from their theft. Plain and simple. Now, when they took over the national park, I don't quite know what was going on there, to be honest. And I'm not entirely certain where that park is in relation to those farms, or if it was in relation to the Hammond case, which was equally bad as the Bundy case and had similar support. And they inter-supported each other as a result. But to call these people militants just because they were defending property and staging a mass protest, one which they couldn't get easily shot at without having some sort of recompense come back on them. That's the kind of thing that the Finicum shooting, if you ever watch the footage, is very telling as to the tactics used. And to be quite frank, it's an atrocity that we need to address as a nation. It may just be one man, but it sets a precedent.
Sorry, I was getting something ready over here. Yeah, and like beyond that, there's also the idea that if you start to accept this as a precedent, essentially the state can move wherever they want. Endgame, blueprint for global domination, global enslavement. That's what it was called. Fucking something.
Yep.
Reach in my brain for a terrible adjective and noun thing. So that's a good sort of documentary on this, because you've got really clear lines drawn, and it shows that the state essentially has made a mesh net out of the roads and public lands to essentially put us in pens. And if you start looking at these roads as walls instead of roads, it really looks like a prison. It completely looks like a prison. It doesn't look like a free access place because the state owns those roads and can decide how they're used. They own well, they claim to own anyway. They can't ethically own anything according to me. But
well, according to logic as well, because groups can't own things, only individuals can. Even if you've got a business, a person signing the buying of the land, the ownership documents, all of that stuff, a person's still involved in doing all of that. So even when like actual groups that can exist do it, there is an individual to tie it to. That doesn't exist really in the state because you'll have people who'll sign it. So it's still a person doing it, but to them, it isn't the person doing it. It's the group. And therefore the group owns it, which again, they're just ignoring the basic fundamentals of how interactions work.
Well,
it's ridiculous.
Well, so I guess my point is, if people don't look at this as connected to a bunch of other things, it looks like an overreaction on the part of the Finicums. And it looks like an overreaction on the part of the Bundy ranch owners and everybody else who supported them. It looks like an overreaction because people don't consider that the more land government takes, the more land the average person can't use without, a gun being aimed at them. And when people are actively dying because of a situation like this, since most of these people weren't around during the revolution and have never had to kill anybody, it's really demoralizing because they weren't expecting an actual war. They were just expecting coming up alongside this sort of thing with their guns. The other people back down and they win. That's what they were expecting. And then one of theirs died, and the entire thing with relatively no changes kept on going the way it was. And so effectively the state, it seems to me, I might be wrong, I don't think so, though. It's like it seems like the state just wanted to demoralize them. It wanted to take away something that they could never get back. It wanted to be very specific about it, and it wouldn't surprise me if the douchebag had something in his ear that was telling him to do that.
Oh yeah, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. The government is notorious for this kind of thing, and they will lie to cover themselves up. They'll do anything basically to make sure that the people don't know exactly what's going on. And they'll do it with language. They'll do it with action. Doesn't matter. They'll use whatever tools are available to them.
Yeah. So, and on this subject, this is from Freedom Outpost, so I don't know, take it with a grain of salt. They have like the paid content ads at the top of the screen where they're much more interested in showing you the #1 trick to reverse tinnitus. And fucking
don't get that with Brave though.
And well, yeah, but I'm saying like their priorities, and a mind-blowing trick to eliminate diabetes, which has a woman holding her feet. So I mean, take it with a grain of salt, but
yeah,
one of their U.S. News things written by Tim Brown says, bombshell in trial of FBI sniper who shot at Lavoy Finicum. 8 shots were fired, only 2 shell casings were recovered. A bombshell was delivered by the prosecution in which they alleged that a total of 8 shots were fired, but only 2 of the shell casings were recovered. They claimed that Astarita took that other 6 shell casings. That's fucking improper grammar, but whatever. The trial of W. Joseph Astarita, a member of the FBI's hostage rescue team, has begun in Portland, Oregon, centered around charges that against him that he both lied and obstructed justice concerning the shooting and subsequent death of Robert Lavoy Finicum on January 26, 2016. However, a bombshell was delivered by the prosecution in which they alleged that a total of 8 shots were fired, but only 2 shell casings were recovered. They claimed that Astorita took that other 6 shell casings. That a fucking again, whatever. Grammar is not the thing here. U.S. District Judge Robert E. Jones has already thrown out 2 of the 5 charges against Astorita. He is facing 2 counts of making a false statement, alleging he lied to his immediate FBI supervisor at the scene and another FBI supervisor several days later about the shooting at Finicum's truck. Astorita also faces 1 count of obstruction of justice in his initial interview with the Oregon State Police on the night of the shooting. Astorita's pled not guilty to all of the charges. It should also be noted that he walked out a free man without posting bail, a courtesy not afforded to those arrested on January 26, 2016. They spent nearly 2 years in prison and had a prosecution that violated their rights and broke the law doing so. So there's much more here. And people should read it. That is if they can get past the paid content, or just download Brave, like Daniel suggested, and support the show. Hint, hint, nudge, shove off cliff. But it's a relatively interesting idea that they couldn't even get all of the evidence from the crime scene, and the cop is still considered innocent.
Oh, of course, because obviously he's a cop. Therefore, he must be innocent. This is the logic that the state uses. He works for us, therefore he must be good. It's not that human nature actually applies and people are neutral to begin with and become corrupt as they get power. Now, that couldn't possibly be why things happen. No, it's just that the state is good and therefore you should just trust us. We know what we're doing. Despite all evidence to the contrary, we know what we're doing.
Well, and honestly, on that level, so you followed this relatively closely. Have any of the other cops been charged? Because essentially they corralled these people into small areas with guns, and they didn't even need to do that. They started standoffs near like passes and shit. Like that, there are pictures now of an armed standoff that took place. And,
yeah.
And were any of the people in charge indicted? Because I don't think so, but I'm asking.
Now, to my knowledge, this is the first of any actual indictments of anybody in the employment of the government over this incident. There were loads of people indicted and put under trial for actually being involved in this, but that's on the, quote, militant side, unquote. Most of the people, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Cliven actually wound up getting a pardon from Trump over this nonsense, because even Trump recognized the fact that this was this is a step too far now. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that confuses the hell out of me. It's a good thing. I'm not saying it isn't, but in order for it to move forward, it needed a pardon. That's defending your own property from somebody trying to take it from you under jumped up local regulation for some sort of creature that barely exists there and disrupts your entire life simply because you live in Nevada, not someplace like New York or one of the original colonies, which actually has it in writing that the government can't just take your land.
Yeah.
And it's the justification of it goes back to the fact that all of those states basically joined the Union after the Civil War. And therefore, it's the Union that owns the land, and anybody who gets land from the Union still technically doesn't own the land. Even if they bought it, spent money, and got the deed for it, they don't actually own it. It's the government that owns it. So it's just you're holding this for us in trust. And if we decide to take it away from you for any particular reason, tough. And that is basically the law according to the federal government in any of the Western territories that existed back in like 1870. So we're talking anything pretty much west of the Rockies.
Yeah, and on that level, why don't you read the other thing that you had from Freedom Outpost, which was about the propaganda? Because I think that that's a valuable thing for people to understand thinking about this sort of thing.
Fair enough. Give me one sec while I pull it up. All right. So again, Freedom Outpost. So a little bit of a touch of salt, but this is from the Center for Self-Governance Administrative Team. The title is Fed Admits Propagandizing Americans with Fake News. Richard Stengel, a former high-level U.S. government official, head of the Office of Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs at the State Department from 2013 to 2016, former editor of Times Magazine, and a regular pundit on MSNBC, said in April of 2018 at a Council on Foreign Relations forum about fake news that he, quote, supports the use of propaganda on American citizens, unquote. He then continued, quote, basically, every country creates their own narrative story. And, my old job at the State Department was what people used to joke at as the chief propagandist job, unquote. Keep in mind that in 2013, Congress passed legislation allowing the federal government to fund and create propaganda they knew could be used to manipulate Americans on American soil. This legislation was called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, sponsored by Mac Thornberry, Republican of Texas, that failed in 2011 when it was submitted on its own. But in 2013, Thornberry and his co-sponsors buried this legislation in the NDAA of 2014, where it was surreptitiously passed. The Smith-Mundt Modernization Act overturned a prohibition against domestic propaganda that had been in place since 1948. This act was passed as a result of a series of events in American history that drew the concern of those who wanted to secure a free press and freedom of speech of the American people. The concern began when Woodrow Wilson established the Committee on Public Information through an executive order with the purpose of influencing American public opinion towards supporting the U.S. involvement in World War I. The man appointed to be the chairman over this committee was George Creel, a well-renowned investigative journalist and editor of Rocky Mountain News. In 1942, FDR established the United States Office of War Information by executive order to, quote, truthfully inform the American people about the government's efforts in World War II. FDR appointed Elmer Davis, a well-known CBS News analyst, as director of OWI. Davis's job was to coordinate information from the military and mobilize public support of the war. OWI was to create an avenue for government to develop and disseminate the information that they believed people needed to know about the war. Quote, our job at home is to give the American people the fullest possible understanding of what this war is about, not only to tell American people how the war is going, but where it is going and where it came from. That's from Elmer Davis, and that's on record from AP/Wildworld. In 1946, Representative Sol Bloom, Democrat from New York, introduced a bill that would grant the Secretary of State the power to give monetary, service, or property grants to nonprofit public and private corporations to prepare and disseminate information materials. Although this act was intended to disseminate information abroad, there were no limits to keep it from being used upon the American people, and opposition began to form. After having lived through 2 regimes of government propaganda, and after having seen the effects of such government propaganda machines as Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, Congress decided this was not something they wanted to engage in. An AP press release stated, quote, government cannot engage in newscasting without creating the fear of propaganda, which necessarily would reflect the objectivity of the news services from which such newscasts are prepared. The Bloom bill passed the House but failed the Senate. In 1948, the Smith-Mundt Act was passed, with 3 key limitations on the government. The first and most well-known restriction was originally a prohibition on domestic dissemination of materials intended for foreign audiences by the State Department. This restriction has been supported by the courts, even in the face of Freedom of Information Act challenges. In November 1996, the Federal District Court of Washington, D.C. decided that the material under the Smith-Mundt Act is not to be available, applying the Freedom of Information Act Exemption 3 to block access. The Smith-Mundt Act is now found in 22 U.S.C. 1461-1A, titled Ban on Domestic Activity by U.S. Information Agencies. The Smith-Mundt Modernization Act changed all that. This act does several destructive things. First, it puts the Board of Broadcasting Governors on the same level of authority as the Secretary of State. The Board of Broadcasting Governors is an independent government agency whose members are appointed by the president and whose sole function is to create American propaganda and disseminate this propaganda abroad. The Smith-Mundt Act of 1948 created a limitation for propaganda to be released in the United States. If such propaganda was requested, the information could not be released until 12 years after its publication. This was an additional protection established so the government-created information could not be used to influence current public opinion. The Smith-Mundt Modernization Act eliminated that protection. It not only legitimized the heinous manipulation of mainstream media, but allowed Congress to fund it with taxpayer dollars. And in 2011, I wrote a detailed analysis of the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act and its potential dangers. In spite of our concerns, many congressmen were adamant that this legislation would not be used to spend tax dollars to create propaganda to be used domestically. They told us that it would only be used to create propaganda on foreign soil. Nothing to worry about here, right? 6 years later, a former State Department official admitted he created and used domestic propaganda and believes it's the right thing to do. Americans should be outraged over the intentional loopholes in the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act and the dangerous consequences of legalized propaganda. Simply put, it's fake news, courtesy of the elected fake conservatives, and must not be tolerated at any level, federal, state, or local. An objective free press, independent from government influence, must never be compromised. The writer of this was a Krisan Hall, an attorney, former prosecutor, disabled, Army veteran, Russian linguist, mother, pastor's wife, and patriot. So very well-rounded woman.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah. I mean, from my perspective, it's incredible that it's come out, and like openly so, but that people think that you're not going to be spied upon, and that the NDAA of insert year here was necessary. They're just wrong.
Well, and of course, it's in the name. It's a National Defense Authorization Act. So you have to preclude all of those conclusions with well, that was the tautology there. You have to preclude that by saying that it is indeed in the interests of national defense that these things are done. And I don't think so. In fact, I'll upgrade that to I don't fucking goddamn think so. And, you know, the kinds of propaganda that could be made have been made before. It's not exactly like the gollywog came from nowhere. It's not exactly like we got these images of hooked-nosed, big-lipped, you know, fucking Jews from nowhere. It's not like we got these images of slant-eyed, fucking slopey, like skull cavity Asians from nowhere. It's you know, all of these things have been done before. You know, the U.S. has propagandized pretty well before and made it seem as though all of their efforts were noble. And then we find out later that they caused all of it, or just didn't stop the things from happening that they could have to avoid getting into a war that somehow distracted the people enough from the fact that the economy was collapsing that they didn't care about that. So it's almost like, you know, this is a purposeful move to get people to keep their eyes on some sort of image of what this is instead of what it actually is. And they needed to make sure that this was possible, because otherwise, hey, people might actually do something about the system. It's almost like that. But, you know, obviously I can't say it is like that without jumping to conclusions. And I would never do that. You know, not like I'm a pessimist or a cynical asshole or anything.
Oh, to hell with it. I'll jump to conclusions, because it's not that I think, it's that I know this is a bad idea. It's repeated throughout history. If you've got both logic and empiricism to back it up, You're right, no matter what. If you have only one of the two, you might be right, and you can say you think. But both exist here. There's logic to say this is a bad idea. There's empirical data from dozens of countries to say this is a bad idea, because most of the time the propaganda is so poor, most people don't believe it. So even in those countries, because if they did, they wouldn't be constantly trying to get people over here to wage war, according to bordertarians.
Well, and on that level, I guess we'll finish out with this story. We were gonna do one on the tech sector, but I think we should leave that one to be our piece. We start with Tomoto.
Fair enough.
Because this one has something very directly to do with that. And I'm just going to read a small amount of it. Everybody can go over to the Free Thought Project and read more. But MSNBC has done 455 Stormy Daniels pieces this year and 0 on U.S.-sponsored genocide in Yemen. Showing how the mainstream media can be complicit in covering up U.S. war crimes, MSNBC has run 455 segments on Stormy Daniels while ignoring the U.S.-aided genocide in Yemen. From FAIR, as FAIR has noted before, to MSNBC, the carnage and destruction the U.S. and its Gulf monarchy allies are leveling against the poorest country in the Arab world is simply a non-issue. On July 2nd, a year has passed since the cable network's last segment mentioning U.S. participation in the war on Yemen, which has killed in excess of 15,000 people and resulted in over 1 million cases of cholera. The U.S. is backing a Saudi-led bombing campaign with intel refueling political cover, military hardware, and as of March, ground troops. None of this matters at all to what Adweek calls the network of the resistance, which has since its last mention of the U.S.'s role in the destruction of Yemen, found time to run over a dozen segments highlighting war crimes committed by the Syrian and Russian governments in Syria. By way of contrast, as MSNBC was marking a year without mentioning U.S. role in Yemen, the PBS NewsHour was running a 3-part series on the war, with the second part headlined American-made bombs in Yemen are killing civilians, destroying infrastructure, and fueling anger at the U.S. The NewsHour's Jane Ferguson reported the aerial bombing campaign has not managed to dislodge the rebels, but has hit weddings, hospitals, and homes. The U.S. military supports the Saudi coalition with logistics and intelligence. The United States also sells the Saudis and coalition partners many of the bombs they drop on Yemen. MSNBC chat show Starbucks commercial Morning Joe did run one segment that vaguely mentioned the war on Yemen, but failed to note the U.S. role in it at all, much less that Washington is arming and backing the conflict's primary aggressor. Instead, they did the perverse inversion previously mastered by Washington Post's Jackson Deal of not only ignoring the U.S.'s major role in killing thousands, but painting the U.S. as a noble haven for refugees. The schlocky segment, an interview with writer Mohammed Al-Samawi, was a shallow mixture of interfaith pablum, poverty porn, and self-congratulations to the U.S. for taking in refugees, without, of course, acknowledging that they're seeking refuge from a crisis the U.S. has fucking created. He didn't write fucking, it just pisses me off. For a bit more context, in the time period of July 3rd, 2017 to July 3rd, 2018, MSNBC dedicated 0 segments to the U.S.'s war in Yemen, but 455 segments to Stormy Daniels. This isn't to suggest that Stormy Daniels' matter isn't newsworthy. Presidential corruption is per se important, but one has to wonder if this particular thread of venality is 455 stories more important than Trump aggressively supporting a war that's killing hundreds of people a month, injuring thousands, and subjecting millions to famine and cholera. Did MSNBC editors poring over the latest academic foreign policy literature really come to the conclusion Trump's war in Yemen isn't important, or is MSNBC simply fueled by partisan Russia dot connecting in stories that allowed them to say porn star as much as possible. What seems most likely is MSNBC has found that attacking Russia from the right on matters of foreign policy is the most elegant way to preserve its, quote, progressive image, while still serving traditional centers of power, namely the Democratic Party establishment, corporate sponsors, and their own revolving door of ex-spook and military contractor-funded talking heads. After all, Obama backed the war on Yemen, though not nearly as aggressively as Trump has, and it's difficult to make a coherent left-wing anti-war criticism when the current Republican in office is simply carrying out your guys' policy, but on steroids. In any event, it's not likely any Yemenis are going to pull ads, turn down appearances, or phone Comcast higher-ups about complaining. So who cares? To be poor and brown, to say nothing of not serving the immediate partisan interests of the Democratic Party, is evidently not enough to matter much in the eyes of MSNBC producers and on-air talent.
Well, I think it's telling that it's 455 to 0 reports, which technically means that between Yemen and Stormy Daniels, you are infinitely more likely to hear about Stormy Daniels on MSNBC. And personally, I couldn't give two shits. I stopped caring about that kind of crap when Clinton basically got off with it as president. Whereas in this case, it's for something that happened before he became president. So where's the actual corruption going on, specifically here? Compared to, say, other instances of corruption. If they can only get him on adultery, that hasn't really been a major problem for people and their president since about 1950. So,
well, right, and not to mention the fact that even if this is the case, it's not exactly like he pulled campaign funds to pay the bitch. It's like,
no,
you know, and I wouldn't be this fucking denigrating to this woman, but she's making it all about her when there are legitimate and awful areas of corruption to cover. Like, literally, she's being a sexual distraction from what's actually there and claiming to be a part of the resistance. She's just the reality TV show fluff filler that happens before they go into the room that's a different color than all the other rooms and have their taped confessionals. She's a fucking press whore, and more than that, many other sorts of whore. And she needs to be labeled as such, especially since, you know, I mean, this is why y'all need Bad Morning News, because we're the people who are fighting this sort of thing. We're the sort of class of people who are going to fuck these people up.
And yeah, I'm here just to defend the truth. I don't care about Trump one way or the other. If defending the truth, though, makes me a Trump supporter, then MAGA, bitch.
Well, and you know, in my particular case, I am here to fuck up Trump and any other president I can, because that's my goal, and I'm an extremely angry and hateful person to boot, so it doesn't help in that regard.
I'm just here for the truth. That's the only thing I care about, because I think if truth will will out, and if it does, people will realize they don't need the state.
Well, and I'm there with you on that. I'm there for the truth, but I'm also here to collect Chaos Emeralds and destroy my enemies. So
fair enough.
Anyway, I would say that this would be a good place to wrap it up, especially since it appears to be going slightly over an hour this time.
Well, we were under by 10 minutes before. We have to give them some extra.
Exactly, right? It's like the Some More News thing from Cracked, where they took the Some News segment and added more on top of it, which is now what that is, because Cracked writers got mass fired because Cracked is a failing platform, which was largely partisan and stopped being really relevant when they stopped caring about, you know, issues that had anything to do with leftists. But you know, I would recommend, by the way, also anybody who wants alternative news with some humor, check out Some News, because The Daily Show is no longer The Daily Show, and this is as close as you can get. And in fact, in many ways, better than The Daily Show. So go check out Some News as well, just to give a shout out to a fellow YouTube creator. Anyway, I'm gonna go have a bad morning with some eggs and a workout. So I will see y'all tomorrow, and be sure to turn in your community driven links, because we're doing community episode every Friday, and we should be able to keep some content going. We've got the San Francisco story that we're going to start with tomorrow, so I'm just teasing that, where we're going to talk about the fact that tech companies are being blamed for not eating enough local food. So we're going to be starting off with that absurdity next time on Bad Morning News. Bad morning to y'all. Smash the state and fuck the system.
Have a bad morning, everybody.